The briefcase. Come on, hurry up, Mason called over his shoulder as he climbed the steep wooded slope, sneakers sliding on the loose earth and pine needles. Four of us followed him, me, Liz, Darren, and Amber, all trying not to lose our footing on the precarious trail that only existed because we'd worn it into the hillside ourselves over countless afternoons. The forest had been our escape since freshman year. When parents fought, when grades slipped, when hearts broke, we came here. About a mile from the edge of town, we'd built a small shelter from fallen branches and discarded lumber. Nothing fancy, just a place that was ours. It was Amber who spotted it first. Hey, she said, stopping suddenly. What's that? Just off the trail, half hidden in a thicket of ferns, something reflected the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. We gathered around as Mason pushed aside the fronds. A briefcase, expensive-looking black leather with silver clasps, nestled in the undergrowth as if it had been deliberately hidden. There was no sign that anyone had been there recently. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation beyond what Mason had just moved. Weird place for a briefcase, Darren said, stating the obvious. Mason picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was locked, and there was a small silver plate on one side with initials engraved in an elegant script. JMH. JMH, Liz read aloud. Wonder who that is. Let's check if there's anything valuable inside, Mason suggested with a grin. We should leave it, I said, though without much conviction. Someone might come back for it. In the middle of nowhere? Amber countered. Someone clearly didn't want this found. Besides, it probably has been here for days. The briefcase didn't look weathered, though. Its leather surface was unmarked by the elements, as if it had been placed there that very morning. Still, I didn't argue further as Mason tucked it under his arm and we continued to our hideout. Our shelter wasn't much, just a crude lean-to against a large boulder with a plastic tarp for a roof and logs arranged in a circle for seating. But it was secluded, invisible from the main trail, and it was ours. Mason placed the briefcase on a flat stone we used as a table, and we gathered around to examine our find. Locked, he confirmed, tugging at the clasps, but I bet we can get it open. For the next hour, we tried everything we could think of. Mason used his pocket knife to try to pry the clasps. Darren found a rock and attempted to smash the lock, earning a punch in the arm from Liz, who said we should try finesse before destruction. Amber, the most patient among us, attempted to pick the lock with a hairpin, but without success. This is a serious lock, she said finally, sitting back. Not some cheap suitcase? Maybe we could use my dad's bolt cutters, Darren suggested. I could bring them tomorrow. I still think we should turn it in, I said, though curiosity had gotten the better of me too. What could be inside that required such security? Money? Secrets? It was hard not to let the imagination run wild. To who? Mason asked. The cops? They'd just keep whatever's inside. Or maybe whoever lost it is looking for it and doesn't want police involved. All the more reason to leave it alone, I countered. Let me try one more thing, Liz said, taking the briefcase. She examined the lock closely, then began inputting different three-digit combinations on what we now realized was a small combination dial, partially hidden by the clasp. Try JMH as numbers, Amber suggested. Like J is the 10th letter, so 10. Liz tried that, and variations of it, but the lock remained stubbornly closed. As the afternoon wore on, we grew increasingly frustrated. The briefcase sat there, taunting us with its secrets. Eventually, Mason got careless with his knife as he tried to force the mechanism, the blade slipping and slicing across his palm. Shit! He hissed, dropping the knife and clutching his hand. Blood welled from the cut, not deep, but enough to bleed freely. As Mason pulled his hand away to examine the damage, a drop of blood fell, landing directly on the lock. We all saw what happened next, though none of us would later agree on exactly how it occurred. The drop of blood seemed to disappear into the metal, absorbed like water into sand. There was a soft click, and both clasps popped open. We stared in stunned silence. Did that just... Amber began, but didn't finish. Coincidence, Darren said quickly. The lock must have been partially open already. But we all knew it hadn't been. We'd been working on it for hours. Mason, seemingly unfazed by both his injury and what had just happened, reached for the briefcase. Well, let's see what we've got. Wait, Liz said, placing her hand on his. Maybe we shouldn't? Are you kidding? Mason pulled away. After all that? With his uninjured hand, he lifted the lid of the briefcase. Inside, nestled in what looked like black velvet, was a single item, a leather-bound journal, its cover the same rich black as the briefcase itself, with the initials JMH embossed in gold on the front. A diary? Darren said, disappointment evident in his voice. All that for a damn diary? Mason carefully lifted the journal from its velvet nest. As he did, I noticed something odd. There seemed to be a depression in the velvet beneath where the journal had been, as if the briefcase had been designed to hold something else as well. Something that was missing. Mason opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was elegant but difficult to read, the kind of cursive penmanship people don't use anymore. We crowded around as he began to read aloud. September 14th, 1978. I have at last obtained the artifact. The cost was greater than anticipated, both in money and in more esoteric currencies. Grimes assured me it would be worth the sacrifice. I pray he was not merely trying to rid himself of the burden. Mason flipped through the pages. The journal contained detailed entries, interspersed with drawings, strange symbols, anatomical sketches that didn't quite look human, star charts marked with annotations I couldn't understand. This is seriously weird, Amber said, leaning in for a closer look. October 3rd, 1978, Mason continued, having found an entry with a sketch that caught his eye. The artifact responds to blood. This confirms what Grimes told me, though I had hoped he was mistaken on this point. I began with small offerings, a pinprick, a few drops in the vessel. The results were minor but unmistakable. The artifact changed. There is no other word for it. It absorbed the offering and transformed, if only slightly. I must proceed with caution. A chill ran through me despite the warm afternoon. I glanced at Mason's hand, which had stopped bleeding but left a smear of red on the journal's page where he held it. He continued reading, skipping ahead. December 21st, 1978. Winter solstice. The alignment is perfect. After months of preparation, I am ready for the final ritual. The artifact has consumed enough that it now communicates with me. Not in words, but in dreams, in visions. It has shown me what it requires and what it offers in return. The exchange is steeper than I initially believed, but the power promised, how can I refuse? I have come too far. Mason turned the page, then frowned. It's in some other language now. Latin, maybe? The next several pages were filled with text in what looked like Latin, interspersed with those strange symbols from earlier. Then, abruptly, the writing returned to English for what appeared to be a final entry. They are coming for me. I can hear them outside. The ritual worked, but not as I had intended. The artifact has granted power, yes, but at what cost? My body is changing. I can feel it in my bones, in my blood. I am not alone in my skin anymore. If you are reading this, if you have found my journal, then heed my warning. The artifact must remain sealed. It must never again taste blood. It dash. The entry ended mid-sentence, a long ink mark trailing off the page, as if the writer's hand had been violently jerked away. Silence descended on our group. The forest around us suddenly seemed darker, the shadows deeper, though the sun had yet to set. This is bullshit, Darren finally said. Some creative writing project someone lost. Or a prank. Then why was it locked in a briefcase in the middle of nowhere? Liz asked. And why did it open when Mason's blood touched it? Amber added quietly. Coincidence, Mason said, but he closed the journal and quickly returned it to the briefcase. Look, it's getting late. We should head back. No one argued. We gathered our things in silence, an unspoken agreement passing between us to leave the briefcase where it was, at least for now. As we prepared to leave, I noticed something on the velvet lining of the case, a small, dark stain where Mason had set the journal down, a stain that seemed to be spreading, the velvet absorbing the smeared blood from his hand. Mason, I said, pointing. He looked down at the stain, then quickly snapped the briefcase shut. It's nothing. Let's go. We left the shelter with the briefcase still on our stone table. None of us wanted to carry it, though no one said as much out loud. As we made our way back down the trail, the setting sun casting long shadows through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, I couldn't sleep. The journal entries kept playing through my mind. The artifact responds to blood. It absorbed the offering and transformed. I told myself it was nonsense, a joke or a creative project as Darren had suggested. But then why had the lock opened when Mason's blood touched it? Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Mason. Anyone else having weird dreams? Before I could respond, another text came through, this one from Liz. I keep seeing symbols like the ones in that journal, in my dreams, in the dark corners of my room when I wake up. Then Amber, I think we need to go back. Something doesn't feel right. Darren didn't respond, but the four of us agreed to meet at dawn. None of us could explain the urgency, the certainty that something was happening that couldn't wait for a reasonable hour. The forest was different in the early morning light, misty, otherworldly. We walked in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. When we reached our hideout, we found what we had unconsciously feared. The briefcase was gone. But that wasn't all. Our shelter, our crude but beloved refuge, had been destroyed. The supporting branches were broken, the tarp torn to shreds. The logs we used as seats were scattered as if thrown by a tremendous force, and everywhere, covering the remnants of our hideout, were strange symbols carved into the wood, the same symbols from the journal. What the hell happened here? Darren whispered, the first to find his voice. No one had an answer. We stood among the ruins of our sanctuary, the morning mist swirling around our ankles, each of us afraid to voice the thoughts racing through our minds. It was Amber who noticed the trail first, broken underbrush, disturbed earth, leading away from our hideout deeper into the forest. Not the trail of a human, but something that had dragged itself along, something heavy. We should follow it, Mason said. Are you insane? Liz hissed. We should call the cops. And tell them what? That we found a spooky diary that disappeared? That someone trashed our illegal hideout in the woods? Besides, don't you want to know what happened? Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. So did Amber. Even Liz, after a moment's hesitation, agreed. Only Darren held back. This is crazy, he said. I'm not going on a monster hunt based on some horror movie bullshit. Then go home, Mason replied coldly. We'll tell you what we find. Darren looked at each of us in turn, then sighed in resignation. Fine, but if we die, I'm going to be really pissed. We followed the trail deeper into the forest, into areas none of us had explored before. The trees grew denser, older, the undergrowth thicker. The trail itself became more defined, not just broken vegetation, but a depression in the earth, as if something very heavy had been dragged along. After about 20 minutes, we came to a clearing. In its center stood the remains of what might once have been a small cabin or hunting blind, now mostly reclaimed by the forest. The trail led directly to it, and there, propped against what remained of the doorway, was the briefcase. Its clasps were open, and it was empty. Where's the journal? Amber asked, though I think we all knew the answer. Wherever the artifact was, so too was the journal. Something rustled in the undergrowth behind the ruined cabin. We froze, straining to see through the dense foliage. A figure emerged, a man, or what had once been a man. He was tall, unnaturally so, his limbs elongated and bent at odd angles. His skin was a patchwork of normal flesh and something else, something that gleamed darkly in the dappled sunlight like polished obsidian. His face was mostly hidden by long, matted hair, but what I could see of it was twisted, the features rearranged in a way that made my mind rebel. In one distorted hand, he clutched the journal. The other hand, if it could still be called that, had transformed into something like a blade, black and gleaming. "You opened my case," the figure said, his voice a rasping whisper that somehow carried clearly across the clearing. "You woke me with blood." Mason stepped forward, his teenage bravado momentarily overcoming his fear. "Who are you?" "JMH." The figure tilted his head at an impossible angle. "James Malcolm Harding," he confirmed. "Once. Now. Something more. Something less." "What happened to you?" Liz asked, her voice barely audible. "The artifact," Harding replied. "I sought power, knowledge, the key to dimensions beyond our own. I found it, but I did not understand the price." He raised his transformed arm. "It remakes you see, slowly. It takes what it needs, blood, flesh, bone, and replaces it with itself." "What artifact?" Darren demanded. "There was nothing in the briefcase but the journal." Harding's distorted face twisted into what might have been a smile. "The journal is the artifact, the words, the symbols. They're more than ink on paper. They're alive, hungry, and now they've tasted new blood." His gaze fixed on Mason's hand, still bearing the scab from yesterday's cut. Understanding dawned horribly. "The ritual," I said, "in the journal. You performed it." "I did," Harding acknowledged. "December 21st, 1978, I bound myself to the artifact, thinking to control its power. Instead, it began to control me, to change me. I've been hiding in these woods ever since, fighting its influence, keeping it contained. But your blood," he pointed at Mason with his blade arm, "woke it from dormancy, renewed its hunger." "We're sorry," Amber said quickly. "We didn't know. We'll leave you alone. We won't tell anyone." "Too late," Harding interrupted. "The process has begun again. The artifact has tasted blood. It requires more." He took a step toward us, his movements jerky and unnatural. We backed away as one. "Run," Mason whispered. "When I say—" "What are you—" Liz began. "Now!" Mason shouted, lunging forward unexpectedly and tackling Harding. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the journal flying from Harding's grasp. We hesitated, unwilling to abandon Mason. "Go!" he screamed, struggling to keep the transformed man pinned. "I'm right behind you!" We ran. Through the forest, back toward the trail, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, a terrible scream echoed through the trees. Whether Mason's or Harding's, I couldn't tell. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the forest, bursting out onto the road that led back to town. Only then did we realize Mason wasn't with us. "We have to go back for him," Amber insisted, already turning around. "Are you crazy?" Darren grabbed her arm. "You saw that thing." "It's Mason!" she shouted, tears streaming down her face. Before the argument could escalate, we heard footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Moments later, Mason emerged from the trees, breathless and disheveled, but apparently unharmed. "Mason!" Liz cried, rushing to him. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he gasped, bending over to catch his breath. "I managed to get away, but we need to get out of here, now." We didn't need convincing. We ran all the way back to town, not stopping until we reached Darren's house, which was closest. Only when we were safely inside, doors locked, did Mason tell us what had happened. "After you guys left, Harding changed more. His whole body started shifting, like something was moving underneath his skin. I thought I was dead for sure, but then he just stopped. Looked at me real strange and said, 'It's chosen you instead.' Then he collapsed." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I feared I knew. Mason pulled up his sleeve. On his forearm, where Harding must have grabbed him during their struggle, was a dark mark. Not a bruise, but something like a stain under his skin, a patch of darkness that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "I think it means I'm infected." Mason said quietly. Whatever was happening to Harding, it's happening to me now. We stared in horror at the mark. It did seem to be spreading ever so slightly, the edges extending like tendrils under his skin. We need to get you to a hospital, Liz said immediately. Mason shook his head. Harding had this for over 40 years. You think modern medicine can fix it? No, we need to understand what we're dealing with. We need the journal. Are you insane? Darren exploded. That thing nearly killed you, and you want to go back for the book that caused all this? It's the only thing that might have answers, Mason insisted. Harding performed the ritual wrong or incompletely. Maybe there's a way to reverse it. None of us liked it, but Mason was right. If there was any hope of understanding what was happening to him, it lay with the journal. We agreed to return the next day, better prepared. Darren's father's hunting rifle, knives, Liz's pepper spray, anything that might give us an edge. But when we returned to the clearing, the cabin was empty. No sign of Harding, no briefcase, no journal. Just a patch of earth where the cabin had stood, now scorched black in a perfect circle, as if subjected to intense heat. Over the following weeks, we searched the forest repeatedly, but found nothing. Meanwhile, the mark on Mason's arm continued to spread, slowly but inexorably. Dark veins extended from it, crawling up toward his shoulder, down toward his hand. He took to wearing long sleeves, even in the summer heat, to hide the changes. His personality changed too, subtle at first, then more pronounced. The easygoing Mason we knew became secretive, prone to mood swings. He began keeping a journal of his own, filling it with the same strange symbols we had seen in Harding's book. When questioned, he claimed he didn't know what they meant, that his hand wrote them of its own accord. 2 months after our encounter in the woods, Mason disappeared. His bedroom window was found open, his bed empty. On his desk was his journal, open to a page containing a single sentence in his handwriting. I understand now what Harding meant about not being alone in my skin. We never saw Mason again. The police searched, of course, but found nothing. Eventually, the case went cold, just another teenage runaway in their files. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the forest, because despite everything, I still go there, I think I glimpse a figure moving between the trees, unnaturally tall, with limbs that bend at odd angles. I tell myself it's just a trick of the light, of memory and trauma playing havoc with my perception. Then last week, on the anniversary of our discovery of the briefcase, I found something on my doorstep, a small leather-bound book with no identifying marks. Inside, in Mason's handwriting, was a detailed account of his transformation, of the power he had gained, of the other worlds he could now perceive. On the final page was a single drop of dried blood and a message. It's your turn now. The artifact needs a new guardian. Look for a black briefcase with the initials JMH. I burned the book immediately, but the next morning I found a dark mark on my arm, exactly where Mason's had been. It grows larger each day. And somewhere in the forest, I know a briefcase is waiting to be found.